What is public anthropology exactly? Well, in Dr. Robert Borowski's article titled Public Anthropology, Where to? What Next? He states, public anthropology engages issues and audiences beyond today's self-imposed disciplinary boundaries that focuses on conversations with broad audiences about broad concerns. Although some anthropologists already engage today's big questions regarding rights, health, violence, governance, and justice, many refine narrow problems that concern few people outside the discipline. Public anthropology seeks to address broad critical concerns in ways that others beyond the discipline are able to understand what anthropologists can offer to the reframing and easing, if not necessarily always resolving, of present-day dilemmas. The hope is that by invigorating public conversations with anthropological insights, public anthropology can reframe and reinvigorate the discipline. Now, I personally like to view public anthropology through an example that I utilize the metamorphic process for in metamorphic geology. The different stages represent the different amount of heat and pressure given in geologic terms. However, for this metaphor, we will be utilizing different public anthropology terms. The first stage is shale, which is a sedimentary rock with no processes acting on it. Add a bit of attention, however, and you get the next metamorphic grade, which would be slate. It's a slight bit of attention, but it's the start to our public anthropology metaphor. Add a bit of advocacy, speaking with community, and problem solving, and you get the next stage in our public anthropology metaphor, phyllite, which is this metamorphic rock with a bit of shiny material called mica inside of it. When temperature and pressure reach a certain point, they form schist, which allows sheets of mica and garnets to form inside of the rock. We look at this as almost as though the penultimate form of public anthropology, where we'll include open dialogue, advocacy with permission, teaching and sharing, a balance in power, and community involvement. It can be considered and looked at as the perfect balance of advocacy and help to a community in public anthropology. However, there is a point where public anthropology can go too far. Now, as a disclaimer, gneiss is not a not nice rock. However, for this example, the black and white striations on it would represent a black and white view of public anthropology, where we've gone too far and taken public anthropology and put it into this black and white mentality of right and wrong with no community involvement. Again, a disclaimer for my geology friends that the metamorphic process is not necessarily associated with positive or negative connotations, and is simply a geologic process, and this is simply a metaphor. However, taking a look at UMass and public anthropology, but before we take a look at a member of the UMass faculty and his public anthropology, I should take a minute to introduce a very important activist for equality, W.E.B. DuBois. This man got a PhD in Harvard as an African American, was an extremely important player in the civil rights movement. Though most people only know him for the huge library we have on campus named after him, his childhood home is actually the subject of some really cool archaeology, being worked on by UMass's very own Professor Robert Paynter. The following interview will discuss the importance of the work being done at DuBois Homesite in regards to public anthropology, anthropology in general, historical archaeology, and equality regarding race, class, and gender. And now, our UMass faculty member, Professor Robert Paynter, who is an historical archaeologist working in the UMass Amherst Anthropology Department.
Looking at racial, gender, and class inequality and the functions of the state in supporting or being used to resist that is right at the center of my work. It's what I do with my research. It's the theme of many of the classes that I teach. It's one of the, there are points that I try and make in my classes and in my public outreach. For instance, at the village of Deerfield, where we have done quite a bit of archaeology, we've tried to inject issues of race, class, and gender into the interpretation of the archaeological results from the village. Something that's not part of the usual stories that are told in Deerfield. And the general perception the United States today is that there are very few African Americans, if any, in the North until the 20th century, and the work at the DuBois Homesite is aimed at helping people understand that there's a long and rich history of African American life in the North. Well, I think the best way that archaeology can do this, or an important way, is that most mainstream understandings of the past are based on written documents, and only a select few people wrote, and they didn't write about everybody. And everybody uses stuff, and everybody leaves stuff behind. So archaeology is a way to learn something about everybody. A democratization is a way that archaeology can help tell a more realistic story. Historical archaeology involves engaging with descendant communities and helping them put their stories on the National Historic landscape, so that when people go in the summer touring around visiting, they get to hear a richer story. Is another way that archaeologists can help do that. Oh, have been, that's for sure. And there's more work that needs to be done. You know, for a long time, the historical archaeology was the archaeology of especially rich white men. And in the last few decades, it's become increasingly the historical archaeology of men and women in a whole range of class positions, and men and women in a whole range of racialized processes, caught up in different racialized processes. So that's changed a lot. It has a long way yet to go. Yeah, I think in two ways. I think one, by having this place on the New England landscape in an area that is a favorite one of tourists in the summer, the Berkshires, where they'll have to come to grips with the fact that there's an African American presence in the Berkshires well before they would have thought there would have been one. And then the second way is that DuBois is just such an astonishing historian and theoretician. So the exhibit that we've done at the home site makes a lot of use of his ideas and his words in the signage, and they would give people that read them a different perspective on American history. One that's a much richer perspective. Good. I personally, and the project personally, has had very little resistance in Great Barrington. Now, that said, the context within which it's been conducted is one of a history of people pushing back against Du Bois in particular. And there was an attempt to commemorate the home site to Du Bois in 1969 that was really roundly opposed by members of the Great Barrington community. But I have not, and the field school has not run into any of that. It's there, but it just doesn't care to make itself a problem for us. So far, we'll see if the new signage attracts vandals. I think it does three things. One is archaeology has the ability to attract people to excavations. It's a phenomenon that's similar to the phenomenon when buildings are being constructed. People like to watch people build things, and so people like to watch people excavate, and that alone has helped bring attention to Du Bois and his relatives at the home site. Gives people a place to go, a place to do something, and along the way learn something. But of course, another important way that the archaeology has contributed to, well, I hope will contribute to overcoming some of the inequalities, will be to illuminate the lives of certainly DuBois, but more importantly, that he was embedded in a network of African American people throughout Western Massachusetts, and that their work and lives all contributed to New England being what New England was and what New England has become, and that there's respect and reciprocity that's owed to the African American community that's honored only in the breach. So just learning more about who these people were, what they did, how they contributed to life in Western Massachusetts and throughout New England will help bridge some of those, help address some of the inequalities of the past. Well, he was an African American man. He was a controversial African American man, and one of the reasons for his being controversial was his joining the Communist Party at the age of 93. And that all led to a considerable disparagement of him as a person, usually by people that hadn't read or knew what he had done throughout his entire life, or even for that matter, read the letter that he sent to the chairman of the Communist Party USA when he joined the party, laying out his beliefs, which were ones that Joseph Stalin would have hated. So the notion of communism that he had was so at odds with the practice of it in many parts of the world that people's opinions of him and their dismissal of him because of his joining the Communist Party is really not only just kind of prejudicial, but it's also and unthoughtful. But they'd be surprised if they were to actually spend some time with his work. Yeah, absolutely, and increasingly so. I was first struck when I read that chapter by DuBois about the amount of wealth that was transferred to industrializing England on the basis of labor that had been conducted by African people who had been stolen out of Africa and given very little compensation for their efforts in growing sugar, in particular in the Caribbean. So that has increasingly, historians especially have been thinking their way through the Atlantic slave trade and understanding it in greater detail, and see intellectual practices and philosophies associated with how you regulate enslaved labor being developed at the very same time and then transferred into the practices by which you manage and exploit free, quote unquote, labor, wage labor, so that you've got these two labor practices, both of which in some ways are novel in the world, developing simultaneously, and it seems to be a much more an unfortunate interplay between them than is usually recognized. That's to keep your eyes open for into the future. Oh, anthropologists always go too far. It's kind of in the nature of the discipline, but that's too far in both the right direction and too far in the wrong direction. So I'll back off that part of it. But I think of it less in the sense of help and more in the sense that Dean Seda presents it in his book that we're reading for the class, The Archaeology of Collective Action, in which he makes the argument that we are simultaneously researchers talking to people in the community of historical archaeology researchers, and we are members of a society. And when we are doing our job of conducting historical archaeology research, we are doing it in the context of a larger society. And so we should think and prioritize our work based on what we think that society should be, as well as what we know about what historical archaeology knows. We should be like DuBois. We should always tell the truth as clearly as we possibly can. But what topics are we going to tell the truth about? How are we going to invest our time and our students' time? What matters? Answers to those questions come not from the discipline of historical archaeology alone, but they come from your larger appreciation of the society within which you live. And historical archaeology, among all anthropologists, is uniquely positioned to make that assessment, because virtually no other aspect of anthropology studies contemporary American culture. But historical archaeology studies the origins of right up into contemporary American culture. Now, having said that, there are a number of anthropologists that study contemporary American culture, but it's not kind of seen as the mission of anthropology. So, as Seda puts it, what we would like is a society that is emancipatory, one that enhances the freedoms that people have, along with the responsibilities that go with those freedoms. And as Seda puts it, the goal of anthropology and archaeology should be to be explanatory and emancipatory. So those are the two goals that I would hook anthropology to, and I think we would all benefit from an historical archaeology that's practiced that way.